When I mention classical music in San Miguel, what's the first name you think of? Michael Pearl, right? Michael Pearl. He's our special guest today. Michael has been in the entertainment business all of his life. His father owned a large entertainment business in the United Kingdom, which included theater, movies, entertainment, all kinds of wonderful entertainment. Michael produced his first stage musical at age 20. He also worked for a few years at the Britain's National Theatre at Old Vic under Laurence Olivier. Whoa. Michael first came to Mexico and San Miguel about 45 years ago. He spent the summers studying Spanish and Mexican law in Guanajuato. No, I'm sorry, in Guadalajara. Was that right? So he has witnessed the change from a dusty little Spanish town into the international art city that we have today. Michael is the president of Pro Musica San Miguel de Allende, and the city's leading premier of classical music and opera, now celebrating his 25th year this year. They put on some 30 concerts a year, and the 2023-24 season begins October the 15th, and he's going to talk more about that. So Michael, welcome. Welcome to Midday Rotary, and please tell us all about Pro Musica and performing arts. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Ron. And it's good to be back again. When I was here last time, a few years ago, and I talked a lot about myself and my background, and particularly after what Ron has said, and bearing that in mind, I'm not going to talk about myself today. So what I am going to talk about is not just Pro Musica and what we do, but the performing arts in general and what's been happening to them over the last few years, the pandemic time, and then looking at the challenges it faces now. When I say performing arts, I'm thinking theatre, dance, classical music, etc. Everything, if you like, in mainstream Western culture. And there's some examples of what I have in mind. So when we've looked at the sort of global picture, we'll focus down on San Miguel and what's happening here, and then towards the end talking about Pro Musica and where we're at. So the arts are a very delicate flower, and they can easily be lost. There's a lot of challenges out there, financial resources, inadequate venues, competition from digital media, and of course, during the pandemic, the arts were one of the things that suffered most, because who wants to be, when COVID is rushing around, who wants to be sitting with 2,000 other people in an auditorium close up and personal? So everything really shut down for 2 years or more, and although there were some things continuing via digital media, it's very difficult for individual musicians to make any sort of living out of that, because there's so much content out there for free. You know, we can all go on YouTube and find the finest performances of the world of anything we want without paying anything. So globally, there we are, music around the world. Globally, some of the arts fared better than others. For example, theatre did particularly badly. And it's difficult to say why this was. And theatre has also not recovered to the extent that other arts have, such as classical music and ballet and opera. Maybe this is because theatre is so widespread, whereas, say, dance, ballet and opera, you don't go so often, they're more specialised. But I'm sure you've all heard about the wonderful musicals that we know and love, such as Les Mis and Phantom of the Opera, etc., have been closing down on Broadway in the West End, and that's repeated in other countries as well. And there are many reasons for this. After the pandemic eased, there was an initial rush back to all forms of live entertainment. People had this pent-up desire to go out again and be entertained, but that seems to be levelling off. And after that, the result is that the theatre is not doing so well again now. And several shows, quite a number of shows, are getting very short runs on Broadway, in the West End, etc. And some of the reasons for this are, first of all, we have to say, high ticket prices. Any of you who've been to, particularly, New York, other big cities, a ticket for two, night out, perhaps. I've got. Oh, okay, we're back here. Transport, price of the ticket, eating out, etc. You can easily drop $1,000. And it's not unusual now for that sort of price, $450 and more, for a musical in the West End or Broadway. And also plays are catching up. It's not just the musicals. So what we're seeing is a much reduced fare available. Either you've got the big blockbuster musicals where you have to pay a very high price, or you've got a short run of a play, normally with very few actors. For example, two-handers, two actors, like the David Mamet plays, are becoming very the norm now, because big casts cost big money. And you get a 16-week run, probably with a movie star, and the run usually sells out the whole time in advance. So first of all, it's difficult to get to see that, and the run can only be a short time, because these well-known actors, first of all, they get paid a huge amount more for making movies when they're not on strike, that is, and also they don't want to commit for more time. One of the other problems with the arts is that there's a dumbing down effect. We all know about crossover, where jazz and classical music are meeting and fusing, and when this is done well and legitimately, it works very well. For example, there are a lot of musicians now, classical musicians, going out there and doing programs with, say, a piano recital with Bach, a Bach piece, and then interposing, classical world music with it, and that works very well when it's done, and that's absolutely fine. But the problem you get, particularly in classical music, with the dumbing down, is that increasingly orchestras are putting on programs which are moving into popular music from the musicals, the film music, etc. Although some film music is perfectly wonderful and classical. A lot of the great composers of the 21st century wrote for the film scores, etc. And of course we all know the great modern masters like John Williams, so that sort of classical music is fine, and it's crossover. But there's no question that there is a dumbing down, as there is with everything from education onwards, and I only see that trend continuing. So what I see as the future for the performing arts, and particularly classical music, and that's true in San Miguel also, is smaller venues, but not that small, and more intimate performances using more local performers rather than large symphony orchestras, which are going to be confined to the really big cities and whose budgets are really getting squeezed, because the cost of staging classical music is huge as well, and particularly in a country like Mexico, there aren't the resources to subsidize these theaters. For example, the Guanajuato Symphony in Guanajuato, based in Guanajuato, which I've brought here several times to San Miguel, to the Angela Peralta Theatre, which is now closed, and even that wasn't big enough to have 100 musicians on stages. Their budget's been cut from 70 million pesos a year by about a third. So problems with budgets and problems with venues. So I come to now the situation in San Miguel, and first of all, as that slide and what I was just saying illustrates, is we have a great lack of venues here to put on, whether it's theatre or ballet, dance, and classical music. So the Peralta has closed down indefinitely. We don't know when it's going to be reopened. There are just 1 or 2 performances being allowed per month. We don't know what the criteria it is, but generally it's closed to those of us who are putting on the performing arts. Similarly, the Bellas Artes, the theatre there, the wonderful Miguel Marlo Auditorium has been closed for the whole of this year, and there's no plans to reopen that to performances. Again, 1 or 2 things a month possibly going on there, more like conferences rather than performances. And thirdly, we've lost the wonderful space of the San Miguel Playhouse, which is being repurposed and not going to be used for a performing space again. So these were the 3 largest spaces in San Miguel: the Peralta seating 425 people, the Bellas Artes 200, and the Playhouse 160. And so what's left is here in our wonderful biblioteca just next door, the Santa Ana, which seats 90 people, and that is a wonderful space, but it isn't big enough for most events to break even, or even, we're not trying to make a profit here, or even to lose not more money than one can afford to lose. So we're lucky in Pro Musica because we hold our concerts, most of them, at St. Paul's Church, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And I also want to say, when you look at you'll find the Seasons brochure in the fold-out in the middle of this, and it includes opera, and we are able to do the opera at the Peralta next year by a special dispensation, as we did this year in February, but unfortunately, we can't rely on that for the future, and as far as we know, no other organisations are being allowed to use that. So, a challenge here in San Miguel to the performing arts. Fortunately, there are some good venues which have been more widely used because of the closure of these, but also it's not just a question of having great venues. We've got to reach our public and tell them what's on. And from that point of view, it was a great blow to all of us when Atención closed down just recently, not just to arts organisations, but even to Rotary and anybody that's promoting any event. And although there's been some increase in digital media that's available, it's not quite the same as having a print-based community newspaper, as I'm sure you'll all agree. There are some moves to bring about another newspaper starting in San Miguel. Let's hope that those come to fruition, but there's nothing definite yet. But as I say, there's some good news about venues. So, for example, Casa Europa, which has been going for some years, have very much increased the availability of their space, which is the central courtyard. I'm sure many of you have been there. And that seats about 120 people, again, on the small side for those of us who need an audience of a couple of hundred people to make it viable. And when I say viable, I don't mean making money. I mean not losing more than a couple of $1,000s a performance, because that's the sort of economics when you're putting on world-class classical music or theatre. And similarly, some music is being put on at San Francisco Church, both in the main church and in the chapel there, the Tesora Orden, but most of those musical activities have to have some religious-related element to them, for example, a Mozart Mass or something like that. We're also lucky that there's more activities taking place in El Sindicato on Correo, which was largely unknown until this year to most people. We're relocating our young classical musician competition there next year because we had done that at the Bears Artists the previous time. And that's a nice space. Again, seats about 120 people and reasonably priced. But again, not the size that we really need for the arts to flourish in San Miguel. I'm sure you all know that that's St. Paul's, as you can see, where we are by comparison. We seat about 230 people there, and we have an average of attendance of 180. So you can see with an average attendance of 180, none of the other venues available at the moment work. And with that level of attendance, we probably still lose $2,000 a concert. And so that's the economics of classical music. And the ticket sales probably only make up about 40% of Pro Musica's income, and that's pretty normal for an arts organisation. 60% has got to come from subscribers and donations, otherwise it just wouldn't happen, or it can be subsidised by government at one level or another, but here in Mexico that is very limited. I'm sure you all know that the San Miguel Festival of the Arts, the second iteration, again organised by and largely taking place at the Casa Europa, was a huge success, a huge plethora of events, but it had its problems too, because there were too many events competing with each other. For example, 3 classical music concerts on the same day and splitting the audience. So I'm very much in favour of that. All kudos to Casa Europa, but we do need a bit of a better organisation in the future there. So, what about the future? Well, that's what I'd like to see. A purpose-built auditorium in San Miguel, multi-purpose auditorium, not just for classical music or indeed theatre as well, but one that can be used for community events, for conferences and exhibitions, etc. Not huge. I believe that smaller is better in San Miguel in some ways. So between 250 and 500 seats with a flexible space. But we're talking a lot of money here, not least to buy the land, probably altogether a $5 million budget to build it, buy the land, equip it, etc. And it would lose money, so there'd need to be an endowment for it to pay part of the running cost. So there have been various schemes of that sort over the years I've been here, and 19 years, and they've all been dreams, pie in the sky, because nobody's really had the money, and Pro Musica doesn't have the money either, and I'm not going to go out and spend the rest of my life trying to raise the money, because that's a full-time job. But if somebody comes along with a cheque for $5 million, drops it in my mailbox, I'll build you the building and run it for you. So turning to Pro Musica, as Ron said, we now do about 30 concerts a year, and just as a way of starting to recover from the pandemic, we started doing a summer season. This is our second one this year. We're going to continue doing that. Audiences are slightly smaller than in our main season from October to March, but that's okay, because it's all part of bringing art to the community. And we just do 3 concerts, one of which was part of the San Miguel Festival of the Arts, and we'll continue with that. That was last year's, the one that's just finished, because we haven't yet got next year's. And moving on to our main program, you probably can't see that at all, but it's in the middle of your brochure. I'm not going to look at that in detail, but you just get an idea of the sort of scope of what we do. And one of the keys to getting people to come regularly back and back week after week, because in the high season, for example, January, February, March, we have 2 concerts every week or even more. And it's no good giving them, 8 consecutive piano recitals. People are going to get fed up with that. So part of the challenge of getting people to return regularly is to give them diversity. So, for example, in the course of any 1 month, we'll do a piano recital, a string quartet, say a cello and piano recital, an opera, a piano trio, etc., and that goes on throughout the season. So there's always something new for people to see. And again, you've got to bring artists, musicians that people want to hear. And so that's a question of bringing back old favourites. And people are always saying to me, after a concert, you must bring him or her back, must bring them back. Well, I'm pretty good at choosing artists that people are going to like. And the trouble is, of course, that if you do that, if you bring back all these artists constantly because they're liked, you never have any new blood. So we ring the changes, and we have about maybe a third returning artists and 2/3 new artists who haven't performed in San Miguel, or indeed Mexico, before, and that's another way to keep people's interest. One of the most important things we do is every other year, this only started in 2022, the first one, we have a young musician competition which is open to any Mexican national aged 16 to 25 playing an orchestral music or piano, and there's 400,000 pesos in prizes, which is a huge amount, particularly for Mexican musicians. And we choose 15 semi-finalists from a couple of hundred applicants, narrow them down, bring them to San Miguel, have the semi-finals here, and narrow those down to 5 finalists, and from that we choose 3 or 4 winners. And all those 15 semi-finalists, they all get a prize of something, and the biggest prize to the winner of the final is 150,000 pesos, and this is life-changing for them. And it's not just about giving them money. We don't just write them a check, say, take the pesos and go away, hope you're successful. We have a development plan which we ask them to produce for their career, and we mentor them. We get them introductions to many of our world-class artists who appear here, who give them master classes. We pay for them to go to universities or music schools, etc. And probably from the last cohort in 2022, 3 of them have gone on to be able to study at universities in the US and Europe. And that's life-changing, because if they want to make international careers, sadly, they have to leave Mexico and go to a school, as I say, in the US, Canada, or Europe. But also we encourage them, when we do give them grants to do this as part of their prizes, to work to coming back to Mexico and teaching here as well, because otherwise this cycle will continue. And if we can build up the quality of the teaching here, it won't any longer eventually be necessary for them, the new up-and-coming artists, to leave Mexico in order to gain recognition. So, many challenges that we face: the venues, the costs. We found that, like everything else, artists' fees have shot up in the last 3 or 4 years, probably by a third, and although we're able to put ticket prices up, not to that extent. And of course, all our other costs have increased enormously as well, and this is true of every performing arts organisation in San Miguel. So these organisations, Pro Musica and all the other organisations, Opera San Miguel, and the Summer Music Festival, etc., they'll only thrive and survive if you as individuals support them by coming to the concerts and donating. And it's with confidence that I know that's going to happen. And as we enter into our 25th anniversary year, I'm pleased to say that our subscriptions are thriving, and our audiences last season, which was the first year after, if you like, the main part of the pandemic, we don't know whether it's really over or not, was back to pre-pandemic levels and higher. So that's most encouraging. And because you're such a wonderful audience, the musicians love coming to San Miguel. They love the way that you listen to the music and focus on it. You're not eating popcorn and drinking soda and on your phones, etc., which is becoming an increasing problem in other countries. And we're lucky, and we have the wonderful space of St. Paul's with an excellent acoustic, a marvellous Steinway D concert grand piano. And one of the things that makes Pro Musica unique is that all our artists or our musicians, they stay with hosts who are either members or music lovers, and also we do a cocktail or a supper after every concert where the patrons, the audience, musicians can all meet, and lifelong friends are often made by people living here in San Miguel and the musicians. So that's very much a wonderful experience for the musicians, because the average concert they go on, if they're doing a tour in the States, like Ilya Yakuchov, the pianist, for example, did a 25-concert tour of the States and came here as part of that. And mostly they arrive in the city, a few hours before the concert hall, check into their hotel. If they're lucky, they've got a car to go to the concert hall. I remember he told me once that he had to walk half a mile in the pouring rain to get there. There's nobody to meet him. And after the concert, they'll go back to the hotel, or order from room service and fly off the next morning. What we offer is a life-changing experience, and that's one of the reasons they love coming to San Miguel. So thank you very much for listening to all this. I hope I haven't overrun my time, Ron, and I'd be delighted to answer any questions about what I've said or anything else come to that.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Do we have any questions for Michael? Whoops.
If the Peralta Theater is empty, why are you looking for a new venue, a building to build, when the Peralta might be available to purchase, or is that not the case?
That's a very good question. Thank you. The theatre is owned by the municipality, and it's always going to be there, and the extent to which it's going to be used in the future, we have no idea, but that's dependent on the whims and wishes of the mayor, basically. It's a lovely space. It was built as an opera house in 1871, and it seats, as I mentioned, 425 people, so it's ideal for most of us. But the theatre's not in a good state. It's falling to pieces, basically, because there's no money been spent on it. And when we go there and put on the opera, we have to take our own bulbs for the lighting. I mean, it's that bad. And the technical staff, are not up to the standards of putting on things like opera and really good quality drama. It's also very expensive to use. They're taking 20% of the ticket price, plus you have to pay for rehearsals, plus you have to tip the staff, etc., etc., etc. And it's just not flexible enough. Apart from the seating in the orchestra downstairs, which seats about 180, the rest of the seating is both extremely uncomfortable, and you can hardly see the stage. Up in the side balconies, the seats, if you imagine this is the theatre, this is the stage, and the balconies are up there, and the side balconies, the seats actually face that way, so you're not looking at the stage. So there are a lot of downsides there to the theatre, and if we have a new purpose-built auditorium, it will attract many, many more wonderful events of music and theatre and the like. I hope that answers questions as much as I can.
Someone else? Greg?
Have you considered events like Mexican cultural mariachi dance like they do at the Palace of Bellas Artes in Mexico City to draw in 80% more clientele from the Mexican population?
Yes. There's a lot of wonderful Mexican culture in San Miguel. We're very lucky to have that. And I think each organization specializes in what it does well. So Pro Musica puts on classical music, and I'm always being asked, well, why don't you put on jazz, crossover, ballet, Mexican cultural traditional dancing and that sort of thing. But I think that's best left to other people. And again, it's a question of having the right venues, although a lot of that does take place, for example, in the open air. But, from our point of view, I've only talked about inside venues because certainly with most theatre and most music, you don't want to do it outside, although we have a wonderful climate. I remember during the pandemic, we did 3 concerts outside in the wonderful gardens, the Rio de Minas, and it was either too hot, too wet, or too windy. And, so does that answer your question, or have I not addressed your point?
Anyone else? Oops, Gail?
Has anybody considered the facility that the city built a few years ago that's got looks like a big bird out on the highway towards Querétaro?
Yes, that's. I don't know if you all know where that is, at what they call the showground near the Tuesday Market, and there's a huge open space there, and it has a stage with a big concrete canopy, and you can seat several thousand people there, and they do use that. The city uses that for performances during the annual fair, for example. Is that this month? I think it's this month, isn't it?
It's the end of this month, yes.
Yeah, this month. But as I was saying, that's an outside venue, and for most things it's not going to be suitable because of the vagaries of the weather, and with something that's big, it is that big and that open, you've got a problem with sound, as Diego will tell you. You apart from pop concerts and popular culture, that isn't really going to work. Good question, Bo.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. Will this be a mixed-use facility? Will other organizations like the Community Playhouse and dance and everything be able to use this facility? And who will actually own it?
It's absolutely essential, as you say, that it's a multi-use facility for all those things, and conferences as well, and TED presentations. It's got to be able to cope with all those things, and that's one of the reasons why it's going to be even more expensive to build than single use, because you've got to put in high quality AV, you've got to have flexible spaces, be able to divide it up with moving rooms, you've got to have first class acoustics, etc. And who's going to run it? Well, whoever pays for it chooses who runs it. And but what I think is essential is that it's run by an AC, a non-profit, and that it's not controlled by any level of government, because that's when you run into problems here, because you're just at the whim of the politicians, and that's when things like the closure of the Peralta and the non-availability of it happen. Thank you for that.
Anyone else? Well, Michael, thank you so much. Oops, I missed Kathy. Hold on.
About the unavailability of the Teatro Peralta, did the municipality give a reason why it's suddenly become unavailable? I mean, was there any explanation or suggestion of some resolution down the road?
Well, the two biggest businesses in San Miguel, real estate and gossip. And gossip is really all we've got to go on, because there is no reason being given. Originally, when it closed down, it was said that it was for renovation, but I've been in and out there when it's been closed. There's no renovation going on. In fact, we went in there. It closed down in January, and we had the opera in February, and we were there on and off for 10 days. And I said, well, what about these renovations? And one of the staff took me very proudly into the restrooms and said, look, we have new seats on the toilets. That's absolutely true. So whatever it is, the reasons are very political, and we're not being told, which is pretty shocking, isn't it? But there we are.
And we have a very shy Lee Carter that didn't want to say. Is that the same reason the Bellas Artes is closed? Because that was a wonderful theater, or it is.
Again,
But that's state-owned, I think, versus the city, correct?
yes, the Bellas Artes is, as you know, it's a national organisation. There are only three buildings. There's, of course, the wonderful Bellas Artes, the Opera House in Mexico City, the one here, and there's one other one. And it's essentially, you know, a federal institution, so it's not controlled by the city. And we had our youth orchestra based there. We've had to relocate that now to the Sindicato I was talking about earlier for its rehearsals and performances. And so we're very close to the directora there, who is a very lovely lady, very enthusiastic, and we don't think it's anything local. We think this is a decision coming from the center, from Mexico City, but we're not being given any reasons whatsoever. We have no idea.
Shame. Saw many great things there.
Quien sabe?
Yeah. Anything else? Michael, thank you. You've been here. It was 2019 before.
Was it 2018?
And we missed you.
That is. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dorothy.
Thank you so much, Michael. I just want to add that Michael just does run an amazing organization, Pro Musica, and I encourage you all to join. I need to renew my membership. And I've been fortunate enough to host some of the musicians in my home when they visit, and it is such a wonderful thing to do. I enjoy it so much, and I encourage anybody who can host a musician to offer that. You get free tickets to concerts, but also you get to have breakfast with some fascinating people who really, really enjoy their time in San Miguel. So I really suggest you do that. So thank you again, Michael.